What's up, guys? Ben here, bringing another video today. I don't know if you noticed all the stuff behind me. I'm home for Thanksgiving, so enjoy the family heirlooms for the next couple of videos as we continue this CDL Major 1 preview series. Today, we're going to talk about two teams, I think, at least in the beginning of the season, heading in opposite directions. I think they're both fairly young, exciting team, but in different reasons, and I think have different priorities and maybe paths of which are going to compete throughout the season. So I want to talk about LA Guerrillas and Boston. We're going to start with LAG and then cover Boston, break down how they're looking for Major 1, what they've done in the offseason, where they good at, where they struggle at, and then where they go from there. Let's dive in. All right, so like I said, we're going to start with LAG. By the way, I'm wearing a shirt right now. Shout out to them for sending that. I think when we talk about the team, let's talk much in the context of decisions they're making based on, I think, the results of last year, because the 2 years prior as well were not one with very many success. LAG coming in, not really an endemic team, obviously owned by Kroenke Sports Entertainment. If you know who they are, you know they own the Rams, they own a bunch of other sports teams, Arsenal Football Club, yada, yada, yada. They have a lot of money. They just built a nice stadium in LA. So they really want to invest, they want to build a winner. And the first 2 years of CDL, they didn't do that. So last season, they ended up actually getting their first ever event win as an organization, winning in crazy fashion Major 2, amazing losers bracket run. They were fantastic in search, just beat Atlanta FaZe in the finals, which I don't think anyone expected. And then from there, never really got into another vein of form. They were in a champ spot after winning Major 2 and then fell out of there and didn't end up actually going to the final event of the season. And they had a number of roster changes throughout the year. Gunless actually came and went on the roster due to medical issues and other decisions. They benched Nissim at one point near the end of the season for Major 4, bringing in Neptune from New York Subliners, and that really didn't work out. So they've tried a bunch of different things and didn't really stick. And the one weekend they did play well, they won. So what were the lessons learned from that exercise? Well, first off, if you take a look at their stats from last season, shout out Turtle for the sheet as always, you can take a look and see they were basically like an average team last year. If you look at everything in a macro lens, all 4 majors, this obviously doesn't include some pro-am stats on it, just as an FYI. They basically are like a high 40%, kind of mid team. They weren't particularly good at control, but that's okay to an extent, and we'll get why in a second. But they were solid in S&D, and I think a lot of that win percentage, by the way, is buoyed by their run at the major they did win. Like, I'm literally not joking here. So we take a look at stage 1, right? Win percentage, decent, a hard point, S&D struggle point, control struggle point, obviously. And then stage 2, this is the event they won. You see they went 13-5 in S&D, and I think those 5 losses are basically all from the online qualifiers in the beginning of this stage. Then we took a look at stage 3 and really woeful and hard point, kind of bang on average in S&D, and oh man, couldn't win a control in stage 3. And then stage 4, they improved a little bit, but again, still sort of a 40% team, and I don't think that's necessarily good enough for their aspirational titles or good enough at their point to really keep that champ spot and make it to the final event of the season. And I think it gets even weirder if you take a look at just the stats across like the 6 players they had on their team last year. Like, no one, I think, played horrifically bad if you take a look at the numbers. Is anyone really kind of bang on high above average, top 15, top 20 player last season? I think maybe Slasher is the one that sort of fit into that category, but everybody else, I think, kind of had average seasons. And I think what really hurt this LAG team is from week to week, almost match to match, they were never really consistent at an individual level or at sort of an overall kind of team performance level. I think I'm going to get into more of the sort of play styles and tendencies that sort of cause that later on this video when we talk about where they excel, where they struggle. But my point here is that I thought, for LAG, the lesson is, kind of at the end of the season was, as much as you like the sort of Hook and Neptune play you tried at the end of the season, Nissim, Slasher, Spart, like you probably needed to mix this up again, even though you had just kind of done a roster overhaul the season before, because I don't think this combination of players was really going to get you consistent results. So they made a bunch of moves in the offseason. First off, they did not go ahead and renew Gunless's contract. He's off. They sent Nissim off to London Royal Ravens after kind of deciding on the rest of the roster. So he's also gone. And then Austin Litico, aka Slasher, off again. Another really good season. I think probably the player on the team that played the best. He actually ended up basically swapping places with Arcides on Atlanta FaZe. So he's no longer on the team. And so now this is your starting 4 for this season. Arcides, Hook, Neptune, and Spart. They do have one other player on their roster, and that is Joe Deceives. Young player, just became eligible to compete. Has done really good online. His team, LAG Academy, actually just won a few weeks ago in Challenger. So he's on a top Challengers team playing solid. I think Joe will feature at some point this season, but this is the 5 that LAG is rolling with at the moment. There were also other changes to this team. In the offseason, they got rid of Ricky. He moved on to a team management role with the new organization. And Bevels, who is no longer with the team, from their coaching staff. So they started completely blank. And they brought in Marky B to go ahead and head the staff and build out their tool of operations on that front. While they didn't really necessarily overhaul the sort of core lineup here of Hook, Neptune, Spart, they did overhaul the coaching lineup, I think, again, in response to the last 3 years. And I think especially towards last season, not qualifying for champs. So taking a look at this team, where are they good? Where do they struggle? I think their strength on this team is the dynamic subplay of Hook and Neptune. I think when they're on, they are difficult players to kill. They have very quality, high level movement as individual sub players. So they're going to win those ones and do it well with really quality mechanics. And they're going to be hard to kill because they stay alive. They move around, like they're just going to be dynamic and active on the map. I think Arcides, when he played well last season for Atlanta FaZe, was also a tough kill. And we know what he brings from an IGL standpoint when he's on. He's calling his troops, commanding his troops, helping up with sort of keeping everybody on pace and what you need in a respawn mode in order to play the full length of a map and get to 250 in hardpoint, 3 rounds in control, etc., etc. And obviously, look, Alex, a multi-time world champion, like he's done his thing on a lot of other teams and seen a lot of success. Where I think this team struggles, and I alluded to it like literally probably 5 minutes earlier in the video, bro, you look at the people and the players on this team and the stats, and if I were to dive deeper, by the way, and pull up like individual matches from last season, the major splits, I think it would become more obvious to you that almost match to match, week to week, these players are extremely inconsistent. And I feel like that caps their ceiling as a team. I think one criticism I had, and I think I mentioned a lot watching LA Guerrillas play the last season, was they would often, I think, forget to pick up lanes on the map. And I think Hook and Neptune were at times like the biggest offenders of this. In many situations, teams kind of have base rules, depending on if you're a certain person off a spawn, first guy, last guy, you're going to take sort of a specific route on the map. And I feel like oftentimes I would see Hook and Neptune spawn up and not really go the right way on the map. And then all of a sudden LAG gets pinched or they get overloaded from a lane because they weren't really expecting people to hit that because they weren't getting information because the timing was off. I still see that being a problem with this team. All right, so all of that considered, where do I think the team stands? What do they got to do? So right now in the coaches poll that just got released, the coaches have voted LA Guerrillas the second worst team in the CDL. And I think this kind of jives with sort of my thoughts from when I was doing sort of preseason power rankings of that tier list and my like initial sort of pass on stuff after Labor Day, that I felt like this version of this lineup, it's probably not going to succeed and they're going to make changes throughout the season. And I think the coaches kind of feel almost like that's where it's going to a bit. And look, it's early. Teams are just practicing now. It's possible between now and I'm recording this video in like December 2nd and 3rd, this team will get a lot better and maybe get a good start off to Major 1. But I feel more likely scenario with this team is that they are going to make either 1 or 2 changes somewhere in this season to kind of shuffle this lineup again and find the right combination of players. And then even on a more macro level, I like them bringing in Alec, considering that Slasher was basically replacing Alec's spot on FaZe. And I see that as a multi-year project. And I think LAG does too, because they signed a bunch of these players to 3-year deals. So even look, if this season kind of nets with them being sort of top 6, top 8, I would say as a 2-year goal 1 is to try and get this team to be consistently in that box where you're kind of on the verge or making it to Sundays at events. And then year 2, try and recruit free agents to the projects. Now, question that I have is this off season when we had players like Afro and Gammy and Bant head off to Minnesota. I'm very curious if LAG ever entertained those players, or they were just always committed to the Hook, Neptune, Spark thing. And if they wanted to make changes down the line, then they were just going to deal with it as it came up and sort of evaluate talent. So one thing to consider, I personally think right now, LAG is probably heading to being out of groups in Major 1. I think they're going to pull up and be out by the weekend, placing top 8 to top 16, because I don't know how you rank, 3rd and 4th in those groups. Ultimately, I think they're not going to make it to the weekend. And I'm very curious to see what they do in between Major 1 and Major 2. Obviously, again, Joe Deceiv's on the bench. They could rotate him in and make a change before Major 2, or they can try and stick it for another major. But, you want to make sure you get enough points to qualify for champs. And candidly, right now, with this roster, I don't think that they are currently destined for a spot at champs again. But I see shades of almost like the Toronto team from Cold War with like one or two changes to this team. They could actually get particularly good. And off of, I think, sort of the emotional impact that Alec can kind of bring to the squad, if they can kind of nail those rotations on what they're going to do in terms of a roster spot, this team might be able to jump up a lot of spots in its power rankings if they conduct their business right. But I just don't think as constructed this roster is really going to get it done in the CDL. All right, next up, let's talk about the Boston Breach. So last year was their first season in the CDL. They were sort of filling in and have acquired the Chicago Huntsman spot after obviously the Optic and Dallas Empire merged during the offseason last year. They basically rolled Methods, TJ, and Nero for most of the season. They had Capsule in the mix until Major 4, in which they rotated in Reese Vivid, who came over from Florida. And I thought, by the way, amazing roster move for them. I don't know how they got Reese. And for Boston, I thought it was a fairly successful season. Yes, they didn't really win anything, but coming in, being the last team formed, to an extent being a team of leftovers, they were consistent like a top 8, top 6 team all season. And again, just like with LAG, you look at the overall numbers, and they were in the mix, and probably a little bit better, more consistent than LAG over the course. And I think across all game modes, we're pretty good. Yes, another team that's like, of the 3 we reviewed so far, that like isn't that good at control, but when it came to search and hardpoint, they were very serviceable in those modes. But I think where they struggled last season and why they were never able to take that next step is, let's take a look at their map records against the teams that did particularly well at Champs. So LA Thieves, they did not get a single win against them last season. Optic, they were 1-2, and I believe the only win was sort of the beginning of Major 4 online. Obviously a decent result for Boston, but overall when these teams had scored up, mostly in Optic's favor. I think surprisingly, by the way, they were 3-0 against Seattle. I didn't even realize that before I did this video and completely memory hold this, but that's actually impressive. But I think the main thing here is FaZe. They were 0-4 against FaZe and only won 1 map against FaZe the entire year, which was an S&D on Berlin. So between LA Thieves and FaZe, who I thought were like Team A, Team B, number 1, number 2 at the end of the season, Boston was never able to sort of beat those squads. And I think, again, when you look at sort of Boston's run through some of these majors, yes, they were able to win their winners round 1 matchup at the majors, but the minute they had a good team in the next round, they faltered. And then maybe they won a series or 2 after that, but it was top 6, top 8. One other sort of good placing, I believe, where they got top 3 at Major 2 in Minnesota. But overall, that was sort of the hurdle they couldn't really figure out last season. So let's talk about the changes they made in the offseason. So Capsule ended up not getting re-signed, and candidly, after they dropped him, it didn't really seem like he was really a part of their long-term plans. So really, actually, Boston didn't make that many moves in the offseason. They let TJ Halley walk, and he ended up going over to the Vegas Legion. And so with TJ going, they brought in Big Wake from Florida. Again, as part of that Florida roster breaking up, they were able to bring Big Wake on as a free agent. And I think that's probably a upgrade for Tej. Again, I like Tej. I think he fills a specific role on teams. Is it a role good enough for major contenders? Obviously, I think I covered that a bit in the Vegas video if you want to go back and look at that. But for Big Wake, I think we know the level of talent, and the last couple of years on Florida were mixed, I think for a number of reasons. But a real opportunity to get on a better team here, pair with his old teammate in Reese Vivid and Nero and Methods. Like, I really liked this change for Boston to upgrade the one position. Now, another thing that they sort of entertained for a second was, do we swap Methods out? Playster was linked to this team. A bunch of other ARs were linked to this team. They decided to run it back with Zin, and I respect that decision. I think Zin as a player obviously has a lot of criticisms, and I think I have been sort of in that box as well, talking about how I think Zin plays, and I think, at the expense of, managing his stats, I feel like he could be a little bit more active on the map and just sort of set up his team a little bit more. But I also do think that Zin brings a level of stability to this team. I think running it back is something they should have done, because I think they owe it to him at least. To see if this team works. Now, on their bench, they did pick up Beans, a well sought after, kind of hyped player coming over from Europe. And so he's sitting on the bench, potentially to be called up at a later date. And one to think about, and we'll get to that sort of at the end of the video. So where do I think this team's strengths are? I think speed, honestly. We talk a lot about this sort of game being very slow, methodical, pre-aim warfare. And the teams that are able to kind of shift that paradigm a little bit, use their speed and get in those ratty spots, or be able to break cameras and win tough gunfights, are really going to succeed. They're going to be in your face. They're going to take their team out of rhythm. And I see that Boston has a lot of those players. I think Nero and Vivid, basically the two that come to mind. They're really quick players. and check those boxes. I also think as well, across the board with this team, I think actually on paper should be a pretty good S&D team. Now, we talked about their S&D stats last season. They were like 50-50. But I think bringing in Big Wake, and I also think the way that this game plays may kind of play into their strengths as a team in the way that they approach search and destroy. And I also like the thought process that their coaching staff has. I think they're well set up to be quality in that game mode this season. And I think it will help them get over maybe the hump against some of these top teams that they really struggled at last season. I think if we talk about where they struggle, I think the biggest thing for me watching them scrim, and I think in general, this is a problem even probably last year with their squad. I don't think that these are the greatest sort of communicators put together on a CDL team. So if you watch them scrim or you listen to listen-ins last year, I think at times they lacked sort of that presence to keep the consistent communication going when they were really struggling during maps. And again, watching scrims this year is painfully obvious that in the beginning of the season, that if they were just getting smoked, like they weren't really calling out, they weren't doing the little things, and they really struggled to get that momentum back and try and make a comeback in a map. So I think the coaching staff's probably working on that and focusing on that, and it's fixable. It's going to take some time, but I think to start the season, to me, that's the biggest like glaring hole in their squad is if they're going to play like a better team, if they front run, they're going to be really, really good. But if they go down in a hole against a quality team, like they may get a little frustrated in the communication will struggle there. And I think that really ties into really the only other thing of sort of what their weakness is. Again, the note from last season, like keep mentioning, that they couldn't get over the hump with top teams. So we'll see if they can do that this year, but they have that history from last year they got to work against. So right now the CDL coaches have them ranked 9th overall out of 12 teams in their initial coaches power ranking. So for me, like where I see Boston this year is, yes, teams like I think Minnesota got a little bit better. I think Toronto's still a really quality squad. I think New York is potentially in that mix as well. Top 6, top 8 is really crowded, but I think once again, Boston's going to do the work needed to be at that level, like bar minimum floor. But the question for me though is this team still able to like be in a position to beat top teams? And I think that's a open question that I'm not sure they've answered yet. And candidly, I think they might get a couple victories against the teams that I highlighted, but I don't think they're going to be, it's really winning those matchups part of the end of the season. For me, I see Boston actually probably ceiling is probably top 3, top 4. And I won't be surprised, by the way, if they're good to start the season because they look like a very well prepared team. Again, I really respect the coaching staff led by Dent and Zed and what they're able to do with this team and how this team prepares. So I think going into majors 1 and 2, they're going to be really good squads. I think the question is, can they bring Big Wake in and really take him to the next level? If not, you're going to kind of have a little bit of a conversation in the squad about what they need to do to improve. But for me, I like Boston to be in the mix for, really holding down and feeling good about a champ spot come into the season. And I think on a couple of Sundays this year, they're going to be there or thereabouts. Do I think that they have all the tools and are a favorite to win an event this year? I don't really think so. I think a bunch of other teams have a little bit more presence, and we'll get to them in later videos. But I see Boston improving on from their project last season, and I see them come end of the season being a best versions of themselves and maybe a potential real dark horse for champs. But for now, I see them as solidly a top 6, top 8 team, maybe placed higher at the first 2 events. But I don't think really in danger of being a team that does not make it to champs. I think they should be in the favorite for one of those spots. So yeah, I think that's sort of the video. I think for LAG, I'm a little more pessimistic on them than I am for Boston. I think Boston made a lot of really good changes in the offseason, and their success, I think, is going to be less on the individual stuff and more that I think teams like Toronto and Minnesota and New York made a lot of changes and either got better or stayed about the same. And we'll talk about those teams in later videos. Whereas with LAG, I think they're probably a player or 2 change away from being a really good squad. So let me know in the comments what you guys think. Do you agree or disagree with my sort of feelings about these players? Any sort of information I missed you think that will kind of help color this? Let me know in the comments what you think. Like if you enjoyed the video, subscribe for more. And as always, guys, we will see you on the next video.